Now, let us say you have a region where there is charge density in it, okay, and it's a closed surface, and let us say for some reasons the charge is, portion of the charge is leaking out, it's flowing out of this volume. So the charges are leaving this volume. Now when the charges are leaving the volume, it simply means that there is a current because you have moving charge. So let us say J is the current density. So rho is the charge density and the charges are moving out. And the resultant current, let's say the current density is J. So I will have the net outward current would be J dot ds, because S is the current density, I integrate over the surface, that would be the total current that is flowing out. Now where are these current, where is this current coming from? This current is coming from the fact that the charges are moving out, which means the rate of decrease of charge. So if the charge density is rho and so the total charge would be rho dV, volume integral rho dV, that would be the total charge contained in that volume, and now that charge is, part of that charge is moving out. So the rate at which the charge moves out, that should be equal to the current JDS. Now I should put a negative sign here to say that this charge inside is decreasing with time, which is resulting in a current outward. Simply, this is a statement of conservation of charge. Whatever is the charge that is missing here, is reducing here, is appearing as current outward. Alright, and this is nothing but the statement of equation of continuity. Now remember, this is a surface integral. Now we have learned Gauss's theorem, where the surface integral can be replaced by a volume integral. If I do divergence J volume integral, that is the same as surface integral. This is your Gauss theorem, which we did about 3 classes ago. Now if I look at this del by del T of rho dV, it simply means that the net charge is reducing. Now if I could have the charge reducing, or I could have the volume reducing with respect to time, but I am saying that I keep the volume the same. If I fix my volume, then the derivative is only for the charge. So I can write this left hand side as integral, volume integral minus del rho by del T, partial derivative, because rho could be a function of position, be a function of time, partial derivative dV equal to volume integral divergence J dV. I bring both to the same side, divergence J plus del rho by del T dV equal to 0. Now this is true for an arbitrary volume dV that I consider. So if it is true for any volume dV, which means if the right hand side is 0 for any volume dV, it has to imply that divergence J equal to minus del rho by del T. This is my equation of continuity. So this is another important result which has to be used in conjunction with the Maxwell's equation. This is also universally true. Just as how Maxwell's equation is universally true, this equation is also universally true. The Maxwell's equation has to have actually this also, minus del rho by del T, the equation of continuity. Only then it becomes complete. But when you add this, there is a problem. And the problem is the following. Can I have that cloth, please? Giving a lot of mark. So now that we have derived equation of continuity, let us see what it means to have equation of continuity along with the Maxwell's equations. Now let us look at that. Divergence of J is minus del by del T of rho. All have to be satisfied simultaneously because all of them are universal laws. Now if all these equations have to get satisfied simultaneously, the rho that I refer to in this equation should be the same as the rho that I refer to in this equation. The J that I refer to in this equation should be the same as the J that I refer to in this equation, which means all these have to be consistent with each other, right? Because when we derive each of them, we never put a constraint that del dot D equal to, we never said del dot D, divergence of D is rho only under this condition. No, all these are universally true, which means they have to be consistent with each other. They were derived independently. Now is there an inconsistency? That is a question. Are we checking? We are now checking for whether it is consistent with each other or not. So if I look at equation of continuity minus del by del T, as I said, this rho should be identically same as this rho, which means that this rho I can replace it with divergence D. I can replace this with divergence D. And let us say the space is not changing with time, right? It's the field that is changing with time. So this partial derivative should be del D by del T. I can interchange the operation because it is the field that changes with time. So I have this result. Now I am going to check consistency. How am I checking consistency? I am going to calculate whether this J is the same as this J. I am going to check whether they are representing the same. So what should I do? I calculate divergence J. I know divergence J is this from the equation of this I got from the equation of continuity. Now let me try and calculate what is divergence of J from Ampere's law. From Ampere's law, divergence J is divergence curl of H from now we know from vector calculus that divergence of curl is 0, because if you remember what I explained to you, what is divergence and the meaning of divergence and the meaning of curl, you don't have to mathematically prove this. Even physically we can intuit understand that the divergence of a curl is 0. Why? Because curl represents Let us say curl of H, you had a current carrying conductor, curl actually represents the rotation. And what does divergence represent? It represents, you remember we said I have a charge Q, if I write down electric field, the field is spreading out, that is divergence. So these two, a rotating vector is never diverging. So without really doing, I can do this by saying I can take Hx, I can prove it mathematically by saying H is a function, H I can write as a vector which has an x component, y component, z component. Then I can find curl of H, then I can find the dot product. It will turn out to be 0, but I don't have to do all that math. If I intuitively understand curl is rotation, divergence is spreading, a rotating vector cannot spread out, which means the right side is 0. So Ampere's law is telling me that the right side is 0. Ampere's law is telling me that curl of J, divergence of J, divergence of current is 0. Which means if I look at the example with which I started in the morning, the spread of current, right, that is divergence of current, is 0. But what did we say this morning? We said the spread has to get related to del D by del T. This divergence of J is actually divergence of del D by del T. So these two equations are consistent. Are they consistent? The right hand sides are different, which means they are not consistent. They are consistent only under one condition. What is that condition? This right side becomes 0 only under one condition. And the condition is I don't have a time varying field. If I don't have a time varying field, so if in static field I have del D by del T is 0, then it is consistent. So I can say consistent only in static field. Ampere's law matches with equation of continuity only when Ampere's law matches with equation of continuity only when there is no time dependence for electric field. Which means it matches only when only in this electrostatic case. That is the result now. Ampere's law and equation of continuity will match only in electrostatics. So what happens when there is a time varying field? If time varying field, Ampere's law would give me one answer, which is 0, and equation of continuity will give me another answer. So that is where Maxwell did his contribution, because this first, even though we call all of them as Maxwell's equations, this is credit is to Gauss, credit for this is for Faraday, credit for this is for Ampere. What did Maxwell do? Why do we call this as Maxwell's equation? He figured that all of them are consistent with each other. Figured that all of them are representing the same electric and magnetic field, and he fixed this inconsistency. And how did he fix the inconsistency? Ampere's law has to be true. So when can that be true? It can be true only when in the right side this is definitely true because this comes from vector calculus. So if I modify the right side here, if I modify curl of H as J plus del D by del T, if I were to modify the Ampere's law by this, then if you take the divergence, I do the same operation to check the consistency. When I take the divergence of the right side, it is divergence J plus del by del T there is a negative sign, right? Del d by time derivative of this. So, and the right side is 0 because here again the divergence of curl is 0. Now from equation of continuity, I have divergence J is negative del d by dt. These two are the same. So I can fix this inconsistency, or rather Maxwell fixed this inconsistency by adding a term in the Ampere's law. When it is electrostatic case, it will come back to this because del d by del t is 0. So curl of H is equal to J. When there is a time varying electric field, it simply says this: when there is a time varying electric field, there are two contributions for magnetic field. One contribution by the field, by the static current, another contribution from the time varying electric field. That is a meaning, that is a physical meaning. Magnetic field is contributed not just by the steady current, it is contributed by the time varying electric field also. Just like time varying magnetic field is contributing an electric field, a time varying electric field is contributing a magnetic field. So that there is complete symmetry between electric field and magnetic field. Note this again, whenever you have a time varying magnetic, because of this additional term here, which is to satisfy the equation of continuity, you have a magnetic. With this, all these laws are consistent. So in the electrostatic case, whatever we wrote down was correct, but in the time varying case, you have curl of H is not just J plus del d by del, that additional term is required to make this consistent. So that completes the derivation of all the four Maxwell's equations. And why are we not referring to equation of continuity when we talk about Maxwell's equation? Because that result is already here. We have already used that result to get here. So that is hidden here, right? But in general, these, if you know, all of electromagnetic problems can be solved. Okay. Next thing that we will do is look for what happens when the field hits a boundary. So let me just write this as plus del d by del. Remember, when we say D, it is epsilon E, which is epsilon 0, epsilon relative permittivity E, and B is mu naught mu r H. This is the permeability, and this is a linear relation for linear medium. Well, the linear relation for isotropic medium. Which simply says that the E vector and the D vector are parallel, scaled by this factor in the case of isotropic medium. Or rather, that is how you define whether the medium is isotropic or not. In case of vacuum, your epsilon r is 1, mu r is 1, so it is simply D is epsilon 0 E, D is mu naught H. This is the permittivity and mu naught is the permeability. Okay, so this is this is the basic premise or basic the structure based on which the entire electric field and magnetic field in the medium is going to behave. So think about vacuum. In vacuum, I have epsilon naught and mu naught. So I can write these, the variables in this equation are simply E and H, or D and electric field. I would like to write in terms of electric field intensity and magnetic field intensity, E and H. I can write all these equations in terms of E and H. How do I do that? I would write E as epsilon E. So divergence of E is rho by epsilon naught. I am writing in vacuum. Divergence of H is 0, because even if I put V equal to mu H, mu is not 0, so divergence of H should be 0. Curl of E is mu del H by mu naught del H by del T, because mu naught is not changing with time, so it has to be H that is changing with time. Where it substituted B equal to mu H. And curl of H is current density plus epsilon naught del E by del. This is how it would behave in vacuum. So in vacuum, suppose by some means I have set up an electric field changing with time. Some way I am setting up electric field changing with time. Now if I have an electric field changing with time, it simply means that I can create a magnetic field. If I have magnetic field changing with time, it means I can create electric field. So a time varying electric field and a time varying magnetic field can coexist with each other in free space, which is what would contribute to an electromagnetic wave. But before even we get to electromagnetic wave, you would like to know how these E and H are going to behave whenever there is a boundary or interface. Now what is a boundary? Is the board a boundary? Is this table a boundary? What decides whether it is a boundary or not? When we say boundary or interface, I mean glass, is that a boundary? It's not really. If it's completely transparent for my visible light, right, it can penetrate through. So it becomes tricky if I ask the question, is glass a boundary or not? Because I can see through, then there is no boundary, right? So how do you define boundary? The definition or the way you distinguish a boundary is the characteristic constants are different. If the characteristic constants, in fact these characteristic constants are also called as constitutive parameters. It's a very scary term, but all what we mean is constitutive parameter is actually epsilon r mu r, right, which is telling the characteristic of the medium. Epsilon r tells us how much the electric field can penetrate? What is the flux density? Similarly, magnetic flux density. By how much can mu r be penetrating into them? Now, there is one more characteristic parameter, because this also we derived. For conduction current, we derived J is sigma E. Maybe in 2-3 classes before we derived this. This is also the characteristic. So if one or more of parameters are different on either side, that constitutes the boundary. So let us say on this side I have mu1 epsilon 1 sigma 1. Here I have mu2 epsilon 2 sigma 2. In this region I have Maxwell's equations defined. In this region also I have Maxwell's equations defined, but these equations are slightly different because the constitutive parameters are different. You see the mu naught epsilon naughts are different. So the strength of magnetic field produced would, which means the strength of the magnetic field that goes in would be different, which means the strength of the electric field would be different, right? So there is going to be a change in behavior of electric and magnetic field when there is a interface, whenever there is a boundary. Now again the Maxwell's equations are going to help us understand how they are going to, because Maxwell's equation is universally true, it's true everywhere. So we want to see how the field behaves. So let's take an example. So the line that I am drawing is the separation between the two boundaries. I have mu1 epsilon 1 sigma 1 as the constitutive parameters on the left side, mu2 epsilon 2 sigma 2 on the right side. Alright. Now let us say I have an electric field which is represented by this vector on the left side. Now it could be a static field, it could be a time varying field. What does it mean? It means that I could have two plates here and I could be charging the two plates so that there is an electric field here which is static. I can think that, you know, the two plates of the capacitor are kept here and I have an electric field between the two. But this is a special capacitor where on this side you have these parameters, on the right side you have another set of parameters. What we want to know is the direction of electric field going to be in the second medium, is it going to be continuing this way, or would it bend, would it change? That's a question we are asking ourselves. For example, in the static case, I could have time varying case. How could I have a time varying case? I can think about an electromagnetic wave, which is a case where electric field is continuously changing with time. I can think about a case where electromagnetic wave is hitting the boundary. What happens to it? Right? In either case, I want to know, I want to handle this boundary value problem, boundary condition. So to answer this, what we do is, this applied electric field, we will say we can resolve into two components. One that is along the boundary, which is this, and one perpendicular to the boundary. Alright, and the one along the boundary I call as tangential component, because it is tangential to the boundary, along the tangent to the boundary, and this I call as the normal component, which is perpendicular to the boundary. ET1 medium 1, EN1 in medium 1. What is the problem? I want to know what is ET2 and EN2, because if I know what is the tangential component and normal component, I can construct the field in the second medium. So the job is, given ET1, and how do I find ET2 and EN2? Using Maxwell's equation, right? So that is the given problem. Now how do we go about solving this problem? So let me rephrase. Given, let me call this field as E1, field in the medium 1, which means given ET1, EN1, we want to know ET2, EN2. How do we do that? So for that, as I said, we are going to be using Maxwell's equation, but remember when we started deriving Maxwell's equations, for every equation we wrote down the point form and the integral form. These are the point forms. For each equation we wrote down the integral form also, and at that point I told you that all four Maxwell's equation, you could write it in point form or in integral form. Which one should I use? You would always come with this question, which one should I use? And the answer is, whenever there is a boundary, you use integral form. Whenever you are propagating or you are talking about propagation in the same medium, you use point form. So which one should we use here? We are talking about a boundary, which means point form is not helping. What we should use is the integral form. So since point form is not helping, I am erasing this and we will see what integral form we can use. So we had Faraday's law, which was curl of E is minus del V by del T. The corresponding point form is E dot dl, line integral E dot dl equal to minus del V by del of V dot ds. Because it is this closed loop integral E dot ds. This is what we replaced it with Stokes theorem. We use Stokes theorem and we use this as surface integral d dot ds. And then you had V dot ds del t. And so you wrote curl of E is minus del V by del t. Because Faraday's law was the induced EMF is time rate of change of flux. Induced EMF in the closed loop is this, time rate of change of flux is this, because magnetic flux is B dot ds, rate of change of magnetic flux is this, and this is induced EMF. So this was the actual statement of Faraday's law, on which we use the Stokes theorem to write down the point form. So I am going to be using this integral form, which says closed loop integral E dot dl is minus time derivative of magnetic flux. Now why am I using the integral form? So that I can take advantage of this boundary, because this is true anywhere. So I am going to use a loop integral, choose a loop integral such that the loop, one half of the loop is in medium 1, this half of the loop is in medium 1, this half of the loop is in medium 2. This is the loop I am going to choose, on which I am going to perform that integral, right. Now I know the tangential and normal. So component of E along this direction is ET1. Component of E along this direction is EN1. Component of E in the second medium is, let us say, EN2. This is ET2 because this is my tangential direction and this is my normal direction. So let me clean what is not required here. This is my EN2. This, can you zoom this part? So this is my ET2. This is my EN2 and this is my EN1. I am just following the fact that EN1 is along this direction, E tangential is along this x direction, or let us say this is y direction and this is x direction. All positive y direction is tangential, positive x direction is normal. Now we want to perform the loop integral. So I should know the dimensions to perform the loop integral. So let me say the loop has a width W and a length L. The total width is W and the length is, length dimension is L. Now what would be the left side? Left side would be, so how do I perform the loop integral? I have to start from one side, go along this loop, go along this direction and come back. This is how I have to perform the loop integral. What is E dot dl along this direction? So I have the component ET1 along this direction. So my E dot would be ET1 times, what's the component of dl along this? It is length L. So this would be L plus, what is the component of this contribution of this E dot dl? You have normal component and the length of this is, the total length is W, but remember my loop is half on this side, half on the other side. So it is En1 times W by 2. So this would be En1 W by 2 plus, similarly En2 again W by 2. En1 and En2 are different. I do not know what is En2. So En W by 2 plus this loop. Now here I have to note that ET2 is along this direction, but I want to perform the loop integral in the opposite direction, which means in that dot product, my angle between dl and E in this dot product, the direction of dl is downwards whereas E is up. So the dot product would have minus ET2 times L. Okay, there is a power failure here. Just hold on. Have a torch or this emergency lamp or something. I can just complete this argument. You don't have to see the board for that. You can complete that loop integral. So we reached ET2L, and in the loop down again you have the same issue. E normal is in the positive x direction, but we want to perform the loop integral in the negative x direction. So you would again have minus En2 W by 2. Even in En1 is in the positive x direction, we want to continue the loop integral in the negative x direction. So minus En1 W by 2. Don't open that door. Keep the door. This door will keep it closed. Yeah. So that completes the loop integral. We started with ET1L, went all the way and completed back. That is the left side. And on the right side, so this whole thing is for the left hand side. Right hand side, it's B dot ds. I am going to, so what does that B dot ds mean? Simply means that this is the surface that I am considering, the shaded portion. I am sure you will be able to see this shaded portion because I am shading it in white. Right. So if I do B dot dl, B dot ds on this surface and do a time derivative of that, that is my right hand side. Right? But I am not going to do, this is my RHS, okay. What I am going to do instead is, now I look at the limit where this loop shrinks to the surface. Look at the whole equation in the limit as W tends to 0. Imagine that this loop, I am continuing to do this process with smaller and smaller and smaller loops, and I am going to look at the limit when that width tends to 0. Where am I when the width is tending to 0? I am sitting at the boundary. Sitting at the boundary, on the left side I have the fields on one side, on the right side I have the fields on the other side. So that is the argument. So RHS also have to look at the limit as W tends to 0. Now as W tends to 0, this area will reduce to 0. There is no area because there is no width. And because the area tends to 0, your flux is 0 when ds tends to 0. But when width is 0, there is no area, so the flux is 0. So my right hand side is 0. What about the left hand side? W is tending to 0, so I won't have this, I won't have this, I won't have this, and I won't have this. Which means I am left with ET1 L minus ET2 L equal to 0. Now this is a loop which I arbitrarily chose. So it should not matter what my length is, right? So it should be true for all values of L, which means that is possible only when or the tangential components ET2 is ET. The tangential component on the right side is the same as tangential component on the left side. That is one result. I got the answer for tangential component. Which means if I had an electric field, if there was a particular value for tangential component, that is going to be the same on the other side. Doesn't mean that the electric field is the same on the other side. It just means that the tangential component is the same. I could have different normal components. I can have two vectors, one this way and one this way, which will have the same tangential component, but the vectors could be different. So I can't conclusively say that the vector on the E field vector on the left side and the E field vector on the right side are identical unless I find what is normal component. So the Faraday's law helped us to find the tangential component. We want to find what is the normal component. So let's go ahead and do that. What we will do for that is we will use Gauss law for that. Now, if you ask me the question, why are we doing Gauss law for normal component and Faraday's law for tangential component? The answer is I use that whichever law which gives me the answer, right? Faraday's law was useful because it gave me a loop integral. The loop integral gave me tangential component. Now Gauss law will be useful because now I am going to do the same surface, same interface, one side mu1 epsilon 1 sigma 1, the other side mu2 epsilon 2 sigma 2, and we know Gauss law is divergence D is rho, but as I said earlier, we are not going to be using this point form, we want to be using the integral form to make use of the situation that we are sitting at the boundary. And we also know what is the integral form for this. This is surface integral d dot ds equal to volume integral rho dv. It started with this. This was Gauss law's statement, which said that the net flux should be equal to, identically equal to the charge enclosed. This is the net flux, this is the charge enclosed. On this we used Gauss theorem to say divergence D is rho and changed it to volume integral, and that's how we got the point form. Now we are going to use that. So we are talking about surface integral here. So this, I should be, instead of considering loop, I considered loop in the earlier case because Faraday's law was talking about loop integral. Here I am going to be talking about a surface integral. So this is the surface I will consider, a cylinder. One side of the cylinder is on the left side, the other side is in the right side. Okay. And because Gauss law is going to talk about D, I will try and figure out what is dN1 and dN2. Remember what is dN1? It is in this direction, dN2 is in this direction. The same notation, the same sense of direction. But I won't get E here because Gauss law is defining D. Now if I apply Gauss law, what is my left hand side? So I am going to use the same argument. I will calculate the left side, calculate the right side in the limit that, so let us say this is the H of the cylinder, this is, let us say, area A. I will calculate the whole surface integral and then impose the limit that H is tending to 0. When H is tending to 0, I will have an infinitesimally small surface, infinitesimally small cylinder whose area of cross section is A but whose length is H, H which is close to 0. You are sitting at the boundary and you are trying to see what is on the left side, what is on the right side. Now how do I perform this integral? My ds is in this direction because ds is the direction of the outward normal. So direction of the outward normal is here, this surface. I'll put it in the limits h tends to 0. So dN1 is along the positive x, whereas ds is in the negative x direction. So I have d minus dN1a here. In the limit as h tends to 0, I would not have any contribution due to this outward normal here or here. I would not have any contribution due to the tangential component because ultimately I am going to put h is 0. So So I don't worry about that, right? I'm putting the, I'm writing it out only in the case times this area, dt2 times this area, which would have an h, which would cancel out anyway when I am tending h to 0. I am not writing that. What about this one? This won't go to 0 when h goes to 0. And what is the direction of surface normal here? Surface normal is, outward normal is positive x direction. So, and I know dn2 is, the value of normal component of d in the second media is dn2. So this is plus dn2 a. Again this contribution goes to 0. This is equal to, what about the right side? Right side is actually telling me rho dV. Now what is that volume charge density when I shrink that? What is the volume charge density when I shrink this volume? When I shrink the volume, so if I can draw that cylinder here and this is my interface, let's say there are many charges which is giving rise to some rho v. But when I shrink this volume, what I would be left with is an infinitely small cylinder here, well, infinite small height, and what is the charge on that? The only charge that will contribute is the charge that resides on the surface. If there is a charge residing on the surface, that will contribute. All the charges appearing in the volume will not contribute. So the right side is rho s, where rho s is the surface charge density. All the charges sitting on that surface divided by the area, that is surface charge density. So in fact this would be not, this would be the total charge, right? So if I have an area with rho s as the surface charge density, the right side is a total charge. So the total charge should be rho s times area, where rho s is the surface charge density. So putting these two together, I get dn2 minus dn1 is rho s. Which means if I were to write in terms of epsilon, in terms of E, because my original motivation was to write in terms of E. If I were to write in terms of E, then it is En2 minus En equal to rho s by epsilon. Well, there is a problem here. I can't write it like this. I have to specifically write it as epsilon 2 N2 minus epsilon 1 N1, because it can't be a common epsilon, right? dN2 is epsilon 2 N2, dN1 is epsilon 1 N1 equal to rho s. Which means the normal component on the right side is not necessarily equal to the normal component on the left side. But if I have a media where rho s is 0, I have a media where rho s is 0, then I have epsilon 2 En2 equal to epsilon 1 En1. Epsilon 2 En2 equal to epsilon 1 En1. Even then, En2 is not the same as En1. Electric field, the normal component of the electric fields are not identical. So En2 is actually, I can calculate how much is it. It is scaled by the ratio of the two permittivities. So long as I have two distinct permittivities on the two media, so long as the permittivities are different, my fields are going to be different, because The tangential components are same, even though the tangential components are same. So if this is E1 and this is E2, I'm giving you an example. E1 and E2, the tangential components are the same, but the normal components are different, which is the ratio of these. So if epsilon 1 is greater than epsilon 2, if I have something like a denser medium, I have epsilon, well, so if let's say epsilon 1 is greater than epsilon 2, which means I have the left side denser than the right side in terms of conventional optics, which means my En2 is larger than En1. That can happen only when it is like this, which means with respect to my original vector E vector, my this vector has to bend this way. Whereas if I have the other way around, this is smaller and this vector is larger, it should have something like this, where the normal component is smaller. So the beauty of the whole thing is you can predict how the electric field is going to behave in the second medium given the properties of the medium. Knowing the properties of the medium, you can predict how the electric field is going to behave. Now the same can be extended. So this is all about electric field, where we use the Gauss law and Faraday's law. You could do the same with magnetic field by using the Gauss equivalent of magnetic field and the Ampere's law and get the boundary conditions for magnetic field. And then we can talk about electromagnetic waves. So to complete that, I would need one more class. So if you can inform the QEEE team, which I am not available this whole of this week, in fact I am leaving tomorrow, I will be coming back only on Monday. So if there is an extra lecture required, please first of all let me take a poll, right? Don't you type it in your chat window whether you need that one more class where we will derive the magnetic field, the continuity for magnetic fields, the boundary conditions for magnetic fields, and then I will introduce you to the concept of electromagnetic wave and this propagation of electromagnetic wave. That would need one more class. Why don't you type in the chat window, if you need the class, you please say need the class. If that is the case, we will have it on Tuesday next, right? Because I am going out of town from tomorrow. No, tomorrow I am going, so tomorrow it's not possible, right? So you can just inform the team and let me know. So otherwise we, okay, so PSG okay, so there are 4 or 5 colleges who have said yes, so please arrange for one more class Tuesday. Next Tuesday, anytime you can tell me, I can, it need not be at 8 o'clock. I mean, you please ask their convenience and fix. Okay, so all of them seem to say that one more class is necessary, so we'll do that one class. So what we did, to sum up what we did today, was we completed the Maxwell's equation by fixing the Ampere's law, and then we talked about boundary conditions to calculate what is the E and the E field in the tangential and the normal component of E field whenever the field is hitting a boundary. The class is open to question. Please ask any questions if you have. Let me just repeat what I said at the beginning of the class today. We have the tutorial, 3 tutorials and the solutions uploaded on that folder. Can you just zoom that part? We can write that more clearly. In your library QEEE folder, in that there is an electromagnetic field folder. There are 3 tutorials, which are very basic elementary tutorials which will help you understand the concepts that we have learned. 1, 2, 3 problem set. We also uploaded the solution set that is strictly for the teachers, and I would appeal all of you to just attempt doing the problems, and then you can discuss with your local coordinators for the solutions. If you still have any questions, feel free to write back to me. Any questions for today? Are there any questions for today? Okay, so if there are no questions, we'll stop the class now and we'll meet you on Tuesday next.